guys, we are back. Good evening, good morning, or good afternoon. As always, it is so great to see you. And friends, welcome to another exciting success interview. Matter of fact, today's success story comes from Topaz Lake, Nevada. It gives me great pleasure to introduce my guest, Jeff Sullivan. Jeff, my friend, you ready to get this going?
Absolutely.
All right. Now, all you photography talkers, Jeff has been a professional photographer for the last 15 years with heavy focus on landscapes, nighttime photography, and travel photography. Now, Jeff, I've given our listeners just a taste of what we're going to be talking about. Before we dive into these questions, can you share, or take a moment rather, and share with our listeners a little bit more about you?
Yeah, I spent about 20 years in high tech and then got tired of that, went into photography. And when I'm not doing photography, I'm probably out skiing, backpacking, fishing, or tending to my grapevines. I make some wine as well.
Wow, so I suspect out in Nevada, it's probably a little bit better for the wines than it is the skiing, correct?
Well, we have some ski areas like Heavenly Valley is partly in Nevada, and we can always drive over to California when we need to get up in the Sierra Nevada. So it's not a problem at all. We have a lot of outdoors options around here.
You're kind of right in the center point there. You can actually, Utah is not too far from you either, is it?
It's actually pretty far. It's all the way across Nevada. It's over 300 miles. We're near the California border. In fact, Topaz Lake sits on the California-Nevada border. So to get to Utah, we have to go all the way across Nevada, and that's about 6 or 7 hours.
All right, Jeff, we're about to jump into your journey as a photographer. To get the ball going, what has you most excited about the photography industry right now, today?
I'd have to say it's a culmination of multiple factors. One is that they're going to be potentially replacing DSLRs with mirrorless cameras. Now, I don't particularly care about mirrorless versus DSLR other than that the mounts are new and we might be able to get some faster lenses. So if somebody can come out with what they call a holy trinity of lenses covering ultra wide to say 200 millimeter telephoto in f2, that would be a big deal for my night photography. So I'm hoping that they can do that. At the same time, at the other end of the spectrum, we have cell phones, mobile phones doing an amazing job with their latest cameras. So you have to wonder, where are they going to go? You had Sony a while back come out with a lens that clipped onto your phone and talk to it, I believe, wirelessly. So, would Apple go into the photography market by having essentially clip-on lenses, or will the quality get so good? I can already do some night photos with an Apple. What will the next generation 1, 2, 3, 4 years from now be looking like? Maybe all I need to do is take an iPhone out, stick it on a tripod, do a little post-processing, and get an amazing Milky Way photo. Not today, but maybe in a year or two. So you kind of have to look at both ends of the spectrum. At the high end, what are the big boys doing? At the kind of mass market, what's the consumer capability that's coming in a year or two? So, it's a good time to be a photographer either way.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring that up, Jeff. One of the videos that is actually on my editorial calendar actually should be being shot here during the next handful of days. It's a video that's focused on, because one of the questions I get asked as a solo filmmaker, what tools do I go? People are looking for duplicatable success. What tools do I use when I head out to create my films, my videos, when most of the time I shoot solo? And one of the items that I reference in there, believe it or not, don't underestimate what this device can do. Apple, I'm an Apple guy, so Apple has really dumped a lot of tech into this. So the video capabilities of these, and of course, as you brought up with the photos, it's just absolutely, it's an amazing tool, not something to take for granted.
So I do have a side question for you, because I've just been asked. I took pictures. We had a fire, the Tamarack fire, coming at our house just 2 weeks ago. And I photographed it from across the lake as it got within about a half mile of our house. And the American Red Cross Nevada chapter saw that and said, hey, you're a great photographer. You shoot disasters, not necessarily by choice, but they said, how would you like to shoot some stories for us and do some video of people that have gone to shelters and interview them and, what they're coping with and all that. And I've always wanted to make films. So I said, yeah, that sounds like a great opportunity. I'd be happy to volunteer. But the drawback of the phone, obviously it has good quality video, good quality image stabilization. What do you do for sound? Do you have an external mic that you attach?
I do, and I would recommend I'm going to step on the back side of the camera for what you can't see right now, and I will show you exactly my setup. Here we go. All right.
Because I think that people too, if you shove a big DSLR in their face, they might, react differently than you just doing a little informal looking interview on an iPhone.
It's a little intimidating when, there's a big difference of having a big, honker of a DSLR mirrorless in front of somebody's face, and especially becomes a little bit more intimidating when you have a mic strapped onto the top of it. But I love Rode, and their new Wireless Go mics here are absolutely extraordinary. So if I'm out there, often case what I will do if I just want to capture myself good clean audio, because they have the adapters, I will use a Countryman. This is a B6, and so this is a little tiny lav mic that I will tape right here. But more importantly, with regards to if I'm interviewing or I want to get some separate audio, these things are, you can strap it, have one here, you can put the other one on, because the Wireless 2 Go actually has two of these, so you can actually have one on the person that you're interviewing as well. And the audio is actually very extraordinary out of these things, so that's what I would recommend. And it also, Rode has the kit that where it will hook up directly to your phone as well, and you get some really great audio out of those.
Okay, that's good. I've got a big Rode for my DSLR, and I've got a Sennheiser lav mic, and it's just too much gear for something that you want it to be more, I think, organic and not so contrived that they start feeling more uncomfortable than they already do, having evacuated their house and it might have burned down.
Yeah, there's some really cool kits, cool rigs that you can set up, and I'll make one other recommendation to you here that is another item that's a small footprint, small profile. And now, while GoPro, these have their issues, if you can keep it on without it shutting off on you, which some people have issues with it, but the Hero 9, with the medium on, because you have the mic here, which really isn't that bad as a standalone. Is it as great sounding as something like this? No, but here's the magic with this. Boom. So you can have your receiver plug that into here as well, so you're picking up your audio and the user's audio, and it's just a little bit less in your face as well. So another option that I would suggest taking a look at. Let's get back on track here a little bit. Now, you've seen some of these interviews, so you know exactly what you and I are going to be doing here in a moment. You and I are going to jump in the Wayback Machine. Matter of fact, we're going to go back to the morning, if you happen to remember, when you picked up a camera for the very first time. Jeff, what was that original inspiration for doing so?
Well, when I was a kid, we moved from New England, Massachusetts, out to California, and we took a couple of weeks to get out here. So my parents bought me one of those old cartridge cameras, a 126 film camera, and you would take that down to your local drugstore, get your blurry pictures back, and you were a photographer. So I was photographing national parks, and they were beautiful, and the inspiration was, of course, there and amazing. But the image quality wasn't there. So, I yearned to do more and do better.
120, so what's that? Remember the 110s? Or is it similar size like that?
Yeah, well, the 126 was a bigger one, had a bigger negative, so to speak, literally, I guess. And the 110 was a smaller version. Eventually, I got a 110, and that's what I'd use backpacking. And the 126 is what we'd use, when we're going somewhere in a car. And fortunately, I was able to get access to a 35 millimeter not too long after that. And then I eventually took a class. And then eventually I got my own 35 millimeter camera. So I kind of did the whole progression from really basic consumer stuff to pretty basic 35 millimeter photography to actually starting to understand what I was doing and why.
And speaking of which, can you tell us about your first photo that you took that really validated your interest in photography? Do you remember what photo that was?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of kind of pressure on myself when I went on the road for the first time in 2006 after deciding I'm going to try to make a shot at doing this full time. And so I went to on a big road trip to Zion and some of the Southwest parks. And I found this beautiful 15-foot waterfall, very symmetric, translucent. It was gorgeous. There was very little light way down in the canyon, but it was blue light coming from the sky. And I got this really nice photo on my kit lens and my Canon digital, EOS digital Rebel camera. And in spite of having, just kind of starter gear, the photo is still one of the ones that's one of my most popular. It's got 3 million views on Flickr, keeps getting likes over there. I've sold a few copies, online. And it really showed me that it's all about the subject, the composition, the light, the post-processing. And you can also still find things, even with all the people out there with digital cameras, you can still find unique pictures that will make people go, wow. So that was really encouraging.
Back when you were first starting out, what was your biggest challenge? And Jeff, how did you overcome that?
I think what a lot of people get caught up in, and what I see a lot with my clients as I'm running workshops, is that they're struggling with depth of field and where do I focus and how do I get the right exposure and all the nitty-gritty mechanics, the details of photography. And photography is great because there's so many choices you can make. You have a lot of power to do a lot of things with your aperture, with your focus, with your exposure, with your post-processing. But when you're first starting out, you really want to remove all that, remove the barriers. You want to simplify. So I would say for focus, if you could learn hyperfocal distance and where to focus, that you can just focus once on an ultra wide lens and then just run around and shoot and never focus again, because everything in your frame from say 6 or 8 feet to infinity is going to be sharp. So that can help quite a bit. And then with exposure, you can use bracketing so that you have insurance. You have a brighter exposure, a darker exposure, in addition to the one that the camera might be recommending for your middle one. And so that can take that pressure off you.
And just to clarify, so are you suggesting, was this one of the challenges that you faced when you were getting started?
Oh, of course. Everybody faces these things. And if you're too much in your head worrying about exactly where to focus and what do I do with the aperture and all these details, you're distracting yourself. You're putting up a barrier between you and the subject and the composition that it's in. And that's really what it boils down to. When you want to have a really good photo, you don't want to just point it off of tunnel view and get all the mountains and it's all beautiful. You might get lucky because there are some subjects in there and you might have beautiful light, but you really want to know why somebody's going to like that photo, what's going to make it compelling to them. There has to be a subject, and it's going to be more powerful if there's a compelling composition. And if you're worrying too much about just the basics, the shutter speed, aperture, all that kind of stuff, what ISO to set, whatever. If all that the nitty gritty numbers are in your way, you might not get to, oh, look at that subject. Let me make sure I get that in a good composition. And what you need to be doing is looking around the scene and picking out, oh, there's a subject, and you can zoom in or whatever. But you don't want to be too caught up in all those other mechanical details, or you're really going to have a hard time getting a compelling subject and composition at the end.
It's funny, Jeff. I had to share something with you. I was jibber jabbering with a colleague in the industry about 2 hours ago, and kind of talking about how I was closing out my Friday. I shared with him I had one interview and one video left, and he asked who I was interviewing. I shared with him you, and he pointed out, guaranteed it's going to be a lively interview. And brother, or all you photography talkers out there, I'm sharing that dialogue with you because this is one of those interviews, you want to crack out a notebook, pause it, write down. Jeff's dropping some big nuggets here, so get friendly with that rewind button and take a listen to a lot of what Jeff is saying over and over again. Some really good tips here. And Jeff, while we're talking about your photography, what do you enjoy? You focus on landscapes, travel, and nighttime. Out of the three, do you have a favorite that you really, if you're grabbing your camera, you're running out the door, if your ideal situation, your ideal something to shoot, what is that?
Well, often when you're talking about travel photography, you're talking about people, buildings, roads, human infrastructure, and activities. And then with landscapes, there too, if you're in a national park, you're probably not going to have it to yourself. But with nightscapes, you're probably more likely to be somewhere that's quiet, that's remote, peaceful, absolutely gorgeous with the Milky Way stretched out. And if you really want to make it special, get next to a pond or a lake, preferably actually a small pond or even a puddle that's going to be still, and you get a nice sharp Milky Way reflection. And to see just that little bit of movement in the water with the Milky Way, the stars twinkling, and the peacefulness, you might have frogs going and crickets and maybe an owl or two. There's nothing more peaceful than seeing the infinite space out there and grasping the light years of space that's between you and those stars, and just hearing nature and experiencing that moment. It's like being fully alive, and yet at the same time have you fully relaxed. It's really something special to experience that.
You have an elegant way with painting a picture. As you're talking about this, I'm hearing the tranquility, I'm hearing the frogs, I'm hearing the owls and the night noise. So true. What has been your proudest moment as a photographer?
Well, let's see. That's a tough one. I would say for achievement in having my photography recognized, it would be getting Astronomy Photographer of the Year 2011 in the People in Space category, because there I have my enthusiasm for night photography and my a little bit of the technical ability of catching the photo and getting a decent composition kind of validated. And it also kind of gave me the courage, I would say, to get out and share that with other people. So the very next year, that was late 2011, 2012, I started my workshops and leading night photography. That year we started with Bodie, and we've got 10 seasons now under our belt and about 50 nights out there.
Bodie in Northern California, right?
Yeah, that's kind of up just north of Mono Lake. It's kind of on the northern-southern border, and it's a ghost town and a state park. So yeah, they let us out there at night if you have enough insurance and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I've been out there once. I was blown away. So you run workshops out there every year?
Yeah, we run usually about 4 or 5 nights of workshops out there. We're also doing an interior session this October where we get to go in and see all the stuff that was left there. Back then, people didn't carry, truckloads of stuff with them from house to house. It was whatever you could fit in the car. So you had to leave a bunch of furniture, leave toys, all the items of your life, kitchen utensils, whatever. A lot of it got left there. And there was someone who was buying up the properties as people were leaving so he could protect it all. So it was all preserved. And he did sign it over or sell it to the state park system, but the contract stated you must leave it as is. Now, there's a little bit of wiggle room in terms of interpretation. Does that mean you can maintain things as is, or do you have to let it decay and leave it as is as the weather would do it? So the way they've interpreted that to keep it as valuable for state residents and visitors as possible is to do minimal maintenance and try to preserve it in a state of arrested decay, where you kind of mimic where it was back in the early 60s when it was transferred to the state. Now, you can't stop everything. There are things that are rusting. You can't, replace rusty door panels on a car, but for the buildings, they redo the foundations, they'll redo the roofs to preserve it, they'll age some wood and try to put it where, a piece might have fallen over or off or decayed too much. And they've done an amazing job of keeping this park kind of what it might have looked like if you had walked in the 1960s. So it's a really special place. You get to see a piece of California frontier history preserved, and it's almost like walking into a movie set. So it's really special for us. We really like doing it.
Yeah, and I will say this, all you photography talkers, if you've not been to Bodie, now, mind you, I've only been there once, but a handful of my favorite photos that are in my personal portfolio came from Bodie. And Jeff, if it's fine by you, I'm going to get some of the dates of when your next workshop, if you happen to know when that is, I'm going to put that on the screen right below us. And so, folks, if you haven't been there, give Jeff a ring on that. It's definitely one of those areas that I personally would highly recommend getting up there, because you said it best there. It's kind of like being on a movie set, and there's some really cool vantage points for photos all through the day, some close-up stuff, some sunset stuff, some just you got to go into Google. You'll see what I'm talking. If you've not heard of Bodie, go into Google when you get done watching this interview and take a look at some of the photos that can be picked up at this place.
One of the things that we like the most is that when we get a special access permit, if we're going in for night, they let us in at 6 p.m. when the park closes. So we actually get, in the summer, we get 2 or 2.5 hours of golden hour shooting with nobody in town, before we then get into twilight and light and night. And then in the fall, when we do our interior access workshops, we get in there at sunrise and get to do that. And again, sunrise, might be 7 in the morning, but people don't come in till 9 a.m. So we get to shoot the park again in golden hour light, maybe a sunrise, and as well as shooting the interiors before you have people pressed up against the windows, looking to see what's in there and who's this guy with the camera. But yeah, it's real special to have the park to yourself, and you get coyotes and crickets and the whole thing, owls, and it's just really fun. And creaky ghost town things in the wind, doors and things, wind vanes creaking. It's just really fun.
Indeed it is. Indeed. Again, I'll say it again, you photographers watching this, highly recommend taking a look further into getting up there for this. Bodie is something definitely extraordinary. Now, Jeff, if you could take us to a time in your photographic journey where you failed at something, and what I'm after from you here is a very specific example of where you failed. How did you overcome from that moment?
Well, I'm going to answer that from the standpoint of trying to be a professional photographer, because you want to do landscapes, but let's face it, rocks and trees don't pay your bills. You could send them all the invoices you want, and a rock is just still a rock at the end of the day. So you got to have either, when I first got started 15 years ago, there was still a little bit of stock photography. So, you could get National Geographic throwing you a little bit of money, or who else did I license stuff to? Whole Earth, Farmer's Almanac, and, all these different things. But that revenue stream was declining as microstock came and took off. And then with social media, people started asking people for free photos that they would see on social media. So that kind of killed the stock even further, stock photography. So then you have things like weddings. You look where actual revenue streams exist and will always exist. Well, weddings, people are always going to get married. They're always going to want better photos than Uncle Bob is going to take on his little point and shoot. So that's probably a safe market to go after. And I'm not meaning to underestimate the work. You still got to be, top notch and know what you're doing and be reliable, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to be not easy, but at least there's a revenue stream there. And then commercial photography, like real estate photography. Again, real estate agents and homeowners want their house to be presented really, really well. So if you're good at that, you can go after the high end of that market and charge a good rate for your photography. For me, I had that kind of idea to go into workshops, and I had a little bit of validation on my work, and we became kind of the leading purveyor of people doing photography at Bodie. That also led me to get photography in articles and things like that. And so the challenge becomes, all the little details of running a business, SEO, and how do you do your marketing, and, how do you register people and all that. So I would just say pick a niche. For us, it was Bodie night photography at first, and then we branched out into national parks and all that. But pick a niche, kind of be the best in that niche, own it, so to speak, and then kind of steer it where you want to go. And that's the way I solved the problem. At first, you're trying to do stock and that's not working. You're trying to do online print sales and that's kind of so-so. But, eventually you can find your niche. And as long as there's a business model there that somebody's validated, you can try to carve out your little piece of it.
We all have weaknesses. What is yours relating to photography?
I think for me, again, answering as a professional photographer, I would say I'm too focused on doing my own work and then trying to carve out a little bit of time to go do my own photography. And I don't spend enough time online kind of schmoozing with people and socializing. And that's led me to be maybe a little bit off on my own and not necessarily doing a lot of partnering with other photographers. But I really should probably chat with them more on Facebook and Instagram and all that, and do some of these big conferences. And but I really have not taken advantage of that as much as I should. So I'm gonna kick myself here and try to get out and do more of that.
Nailing composition can be a challenge. What do you think is the trick to nailing a good composition?
I think the key is, again, focus on your subject. So what's your subject? And don't be afraid to commit to it. And again, if you have a subject that's a certain sand dune and you want a ridge to lead up to it, and you have light and dark areas that will help emphasize that, and you think you've got a great picture, you don't want to get too bogged down in where do I focus and all. If you're having trouble figuring out where to focus, make sure your subject's focused. And oh no, there's some stuff that's not soft. Guess what? That tells the viewer that's not your subject. So it's okay to have things that are soft. It's out of focus, but make sure you commit to your composition, commit to your subject, and if you need to, make it fill the frame. You don't need to do rule of thirds. Know the rules, but then break them. And everybody's trying to say, oh, I did focus stacking of 83 pictures and blah, blah, and I blah, 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 all this stuff. It's like, no, simplify it. Just focus on the subject. That'll tell them that's your, you can do that if you want, but usually a lot of that stuff's not necessary. Just simplify and really focus on what it is you want to convey, and then nail it and make that big, make it really obvious by composition, lighting, editing, whatever. And that's it. Just commit to your subject.
All right, Jeff, shifting gears here a little bit, there are a lot of photographers who are just getting started and they don't have the money to buy the gear that they want. What advice can you give to them?
I would say buy something that's more in like the 2 to 4 year old range, and buy reconditioned if you can from the manufacturer, because better than used gear, someone looks it over and tells you if it's scratched or not. They don't know if the lens is in really great shape or if there are other problems kind of under the surface. But the manufacturer is going to make sure with their name on it that it's going to be in tip-top shape. So you can get a really good sale from them typically on reconditioned gear, and they'll often throw in a warranty of at least 90 days. But if you wait till something like a Black Friday or one of those holidays where everybody's competing to get your dollars for the sales, they'll give you a really good price too. And I think I've seen, for example, a Nikon D750 for under $1,000 with a warranty from Nikon. And that's just a heck of a deal. It's a great camera, has really good night performance. And that would be a great way to start out. Full frame. So you're really getting top-notch gear at not a break-the-bank price.
And to piggyback on that, you remind me of the, I think last year or the year before, MPB around the holidays, because I think they normally have like a 90-day warranty, but during the holidays they extended that to a 6-month warranty on used gear. So you bring up a good point there.
At Canon, they were doing a 13-month, and I've bought reconditioned gear from both Nikon and Canon, and I always wait till one of those holiday sales and get a really good deal.
Yeah. That's the way to do it.
I don't have a ton of money, so I'm one of those guys.
No shame in that. I'll be the first to go out there and buy a good deal on a used lens.
You don't want to be the first one with a new camera because often they have bugs. Be the second or, a year later. I tend to buy things at least a year later because the prices have come down and they've fixed their firmware, whatever, everybody found that first year.
How do you feel photography has impacted the way that you see the world?
Well, as I'm moving about the world, I see compositions. I'll be driving down the road, I'll do a double take, I'll go, wait, there's a photo right there. So I tend to pull over a lot more and, whip out a camera.
What do you see photographers doing today that, if done differently tomorrow, would ultimately improve their success?
Well, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. I would say simplify and try to release all your struggles. Instead of worrying about trying to get everything sharp, if that's what you're struggling with, pick something to make sharp and let everything else go soft. And then, I think what it comes down to is a lot of times people are afraid of criticism. Just have an answer to it. If someone says, this isn't sharp in this corner down here, just say, what's my subject? There's always a way you can justify what you did. You're the photographer. You get to control what you're doing. You don't have to please anyone. You don't have to answer anyone, or you can have an answer for when they do. And once you get to that state that you can be confident that you know what you're doing and why, and you can answer all those things or ignore them, then you're free to go do what you want as an artist. So it makes it much easier and much less stressful if you can kind of simplify your process and just commit to the subject and don't worry about all the little stuff. And it's all little stuff.
To get your creative eye focused, where do you, right now today, draw your inspiration from?
I would say it's often with, for me, since I do so much astrophotography or landscape photography involving the moon and the sun and rainbows and things like that, I'm often looking forward to going to Yosemite, and when I want to plan the dates, I'll pick a peak season. I'll see if there's a moonrise or moonset that I can also get. I'll see if there's a meteor shower around that time. I'll look up my spreadsheet, and every time I see a rainbow, it's usually in the midst of a waterfall, so it's a particular sun angle in a particular place. Once I know that angle, I can look forward for rainbows and moonbows forever whenever the moon or sun will be in that position. So I have a big spreadsheet, and I can go into, say, PhotoPills and search forward for that sun position, and I'll have in a given year a whole bunch of rainbows and moonbows that I can choose from. So for me, to answer your question, my inspiration is the solar system and the movement of the objects and the additional opportunities that I can pack into a week and bring people to. And in fall, for example, I sent you one example of some very small baby cottonwood trees growing on an island in the Merced River. Well, they get a shaft of light for about 10 to 15 minutes. Once I found that, now I can go back every year, just go, okay, we got to be there on this day at this time. And again, it's a sun position thing. So the next day it might be 4 minutes, earlier or later. So I just have these portfolios of cool things that I want to show people, and I just got to figure out the times to get back to them.
What is your best photography related tip?
I think the classic one of F8 and B there is it really works well, because then you don't have to worry about, F8's a little wider than running around at F16, so you don't have to worry about your shutter speed as much. With an ultra wide lens, you actually still have quite a bit of depth of field. So that's a good one. But I would say for me, the way I think about it is location, season, light, subject, and composition in that order. So I want to go to a good location like Yosemite. I want to go in a prime season. I want to go when the light's good, so sunrise, sunset, or storms or what have you. Then again, you got to have a subject and composition. So it kind of boils down to, it's like a hierarchy. There's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'd say this is Jeff's hierarchy of photography, things to think about. So, if you're a real estate agent, location, location, location it is. With photography, it's location, season, light, subject, composition. And you can show up for the good shot at just the right time, right when it's ready for you to be there.
Talking about your photos again, last night I revisited your photos, and brother, I have to say, you have some really slick stuff, especially some of your time lapse as well. What is your secret sauce when it comes to post-processing?
Well, I think we spend, again, a lot of time really in the nitty-gritty details of capturing the photo, and you do want to maximize things in camera. So I'm often maximizing dynamic range and even taking extra shots and putting them together to get a really deep master. But just because you can recover shadows and highlights doesn't mean you want to, doesn't mean it's the best thing to do. I mean, you'll do it a little bit, but if you completely recovered highlights and shadows, you end up with kind of a flat image. So you got to put contrast back in there, maybe a little bit of dehaze, but also you can dial back some of that brightening of the shadows you did and the darkening of the highlights, and kind of put it back to where it's back to the drama that attracted you to the scene in the first place. So you kind of have to have an image in your head of how you want to end up, and it's not going to be a formula, so to speak, of just recover shadows and highlights or run it through HDR and then there it is. I'll take it back into Lightroom and always do a final touch-up. And then you want to do just the classic dodging and burning. How can you make your subject be the thing that your eye is drawn to? It either has to be one of the brightest things or have some of the highest contrast. there are little tricks like that you can get the eye drawn to where you want it to be, just like Ansel did.
Now, speaking of your process, can you expound a little bit on your specific post-processing workflow? Like what tools, software are you using to get from point A to point B?
Well, I find it fastest to read the files on a computer into a folder first. Then I'll bring the folder into Lightroom. Then I'll do a basic standard adjustment that I do to kind of recover shadows and highlights, because the camera doesn't see like we do. When we look into a bright area, our pupils close down. When we look in a dark area, it opens up. So we're essentially taking different exposures all over the scene. So that's why I like being able to put things into HDR if I want to, because it's getting those multiple exposures, putting them back together. But then our brain still retains the idea and the perception of what was dark, what was light, where there was high contrast. So it's back to you to, once you've got that kind of high dynamic range original, to reapply the contrast and decide what values go where to make it look realistic, not to what a camera would see as a flat image, but what your mind would see interpreting that scene. So often you'll go to a scene, it's an amazing scene, sunrise, sunset, all this drama, all this light, all these light rays, what have you, deep shadows, and then you'll take a picture and it'll look kind of flat. So you have to restore that impression that you had and that recollection you had of what that scene represented, how it presented itself, and what it, how it appeared to you, what impression you got of it, that what you felt while you were seeing that scene. So I might use Photomatics for HDR after Lightroom. I might use Virtual Dub for the time lapses, as you pointed out. I might use Silver Effects 2 for black and white conversion. I use, at night, I'll use a landscape, a star stacker like Starry Landscape Stacker or Sequator. And then I'll bring the result from all these separate, one of these separate programs back into Lightroom and do the final adjustment. And it's really critical, I find too, to go through that process once and then take a break. Usually I'm really excited. I'll do that maybe the night that I got home, but then come back the next morning and look at it again. And you look at it with fresh eyes. You'll go, why did I leave it that way? It's a little too dark or a little too bright or not contrasty enough. Or, oh, I missed this slider. I better put this on there. Maybe a little dehaze. And I find that usually, as a rule of thumb, 3 visits to a file are required to kind of fine-tune it a little bit, then fine-tune it more, and then fine-tune it another stage before you really want to show it to anyone. And I used to not do that. I'd just kind of get it done and then move on. And I find that I get much better results. And when you're looking at it different times of the day, you'll have different ambient light. At night, I'm working under incandescent lights. During the day, you've got blue light coming in the window. Third time, who knows what it's going to be. But it kind of has to survive that test of multiple fresh looks, multiple ambient lighting scenarios, etc., before you can get it as far as it deserves to be, basically, to be the best possible photo.
What would you like people to take away from your work?
I would say that it's my experience that I had when looking at that event, at that moment in time. So if I'm feeling amazement and wonder at and let's face it, nature can throw things at you that you never could have anticipated, that it just blows you away. There are times when I just want to drop the camera or just, let my jaw drop on the ground. You're just going, nobody's going to believe this. Like that time lapse of Death Valley. I mean, you see that thing and you go, people are going to think I enhanced the heck out of this, but there's no way I'm going to be able to convey it, let alone enhance it in any way. So that's really what I want to do. And let's face it too, there's so much negative news in the world, things that we face, challenges in our lives, in our families, in our work, and so on and so forth. If I can give them one of those amazing moments, or even just a really positive one once a day or a couple times a week, and help them escape from whatever's stressing them out and just make them feel that in the beauty, the relaxation, the good feelings, a little bit of dopamine and whatever else we got going on in our heads, then that's a good thing. That I've done them a service, and that's all I can ask for.
What are some must-have items in your camera bag? Give me your top 3 must-have items in your camera bag, and not like a camera and lens and tripod. Give us something juicy here. What are them?
Well, I would say things that I carry that not everyone does are things like a circular polarizer, because one of the things I do as a hobby is fly fishing. And you might be driving around with your polarized glasses on. And in the Eastern Sierra, I will literally look and go, whoa, when did that mountain get those red tones? And the green is so vibrant. And then I'll realize, oh, yeah, I've got my polarized glasses on. And what circular polarizers for a camera will do is they'll take out the glare from every surface, from rocks, from even pine needles, from leaves, and they'll take that shine off, and the color becomes much more vibrant, much more saturated. It's not enhancing the color so much as taking away the interference from the white light of glare. And you don't know how much of that there really is until you experience driving around with polarized glasses on, or taking photos with a polarizer on a lot. I mean, not just every once in a while, but have it be the default. And you really find out how much color and contrast and how beautiful everything is when you do that. And then also I at sunrise and sunset, I'll use a graduated neutral density filter. I'm a fan of Galen Rowell's work, and he invented those, so I tend to use those. Those are great. Or a neutral density for making, water move and things like that, making silky waterfalls. The other thing that's kind of unique is that even though most cameras these days are coming out with interval timers in them, I use those for time lapse and for star trails and things like that at night. And let's face it, the night in this area is starting at around 10:15 when it's fully dark in the midsummer. And okay, the first night I might pull off programming an interval timer in the camera, but the second night, the third night, the fourth night, let's say I have a 5-night workshop, then maybe I want to go take some of my own photos. 4, 5, 6 nights into the workshop or into your shoot of doing night stuff, there's a huge potential for error. I've gone out one night and taken 2 cameras with dual battery packs, 650 pictures each of my lens cap. 1,300 pictures that are all dark frames. Okay, I know where the noise is now, but I don't have any pictures. So you really got to simplify it. So with an interval timer or even a remote shutter release that locks down, most cameras, when you put them in rapid shooting mode, what do they call that? Anyway, something high, continuous high. So what you do is you set your single exposure, put it in continuous high, and then when you want to start your sequence of shots, you just lock down that shutter and you make sure after it goes click and finishes the first exposure that it starts the next one. And that way you can have a gap of hopefully less than 1 second between them. If you program the interval timer, usually you have to put at least a second in there. You want it to go as fast as possible. So hopefully it'll go less than a second, and it'll just keep going until your battery runs out. And I'll shoot 5-6 hours in a night and then turn that into a time lapse later. So that just simplifies the process and not have to do any programming at night. You don't want to have to think at night.
What's the strangest thing in your camera bag?
I had to look in my bag today because I wanted to give you an honest answer, and it would have to be a fishing stringer. That was in my bag. Apparently, I was out at Bodie one night at night, and I had, gloves in my pocket and flashlights and extra cards and batteries, and I pulled out this fishing stringer. I said, I don't want that in my pocket. It's going to stab me, so I put it in my bag. But as far as an actual photographic tool, I bought a little while ago this cinematic gels for lights so that I could take a light of a fixed color temperature at night and change its color temperature. So I have a whole set of gels that will correct a light in 1/4. I don't know what they even call it, 1/4 stop or whatever, 1/4 increment of color temperature to make your light warmer or cooler when you have a fixed light. Now I've bought a light that I can change the color temperature on, so that's gotten a little bit easier. But when I wanted to fix a fixed light, I could do that too.
All right, so tell us something about your photography that nobody else knows about.
I would say that it's probably pretty uncommon right now for people to bracket at night, and I actually do that too. Even on a dark sky night where you could get by with a single exposure. I find that I get a little bit more dynamic range using bracketing and then sky stacking. And I'll do that with panoramas too. So you have to shoot fast, do a bracket, another bracket, move your camera, do another bracket. And you got to do it before the stars move so much that either they won't stack with each other or you won't get the panorama stitching. So it gets to be a real challenge. And then if you want to also throw in a reflection, the reflection's going the opposite direction of the sky because it's a mirror, and you get all kinds of technical challenges. But, I want the best possible quality, so, you do the work.
What is the last photography-related book or magazine that you've read?
Well, I'm kind of lazy about getting my news online, so I like having it show up in print. I do subscribe to Outdoor Photographer magazine, and it helps me keep up with the latest developments in the camera market.
Which photographer, living or dead, do you admire the most?
Early on, I think my biggest inspiration was Galen Rowell. He was current in his career at the time, and I saw that he developed the graduated neutral density filters. But he also lived in the Eastern Sierra, which is now my stomping grounds. I was going backpacking there and visiting the Sierra Nevada and the Eastern Sierra back then, and really inspired me to move up here and kind of follow his lead.
All right, Jeff, a final question, and it is a fun one. Life has been found on another planet, and none other than Sir Richard Branson is piloting the Virgin Galactic and has put together a team of engineers, scientists, and doctors, and has asked you to come along to document the journey. Now, the challenge is you can only bring one camera, 2 lenses, and 2 other items. What would you bring?
I would bring a high-resolution body because you want to have good detail on this alien life. Probably a 600 millimeter prime because you need a fast lens and you want to shoot it from a distance, and maybe a 70 to 200 when you're a little bit closer. And then for the 2 extra items, well, I forget who it was that pointed this out. It was either Carl Sagan or someone along those lines, but he said, if we do find alien life, it was probably anyway, if we do find alien life, they're probably going to want to eat us. So I'll bring a flamethrower and maybe an EpiPen so I can not die when they bite me.
Jeff, going back to that call I told you I had with a colleague in the industry 2 hours before our interview, he promised me, he's like, yeah, Jeff's going to give you an amazing interview. And he wasn't exaggerating. Jeff, you gave an amazing interview and a lot of very valuable nuggets here for the audience and people watching this video here. Now, before we part ways, can you share with our listeners one final piece of advice, also where they can find you on the web, then we'll say goodbye.
I would say to find me, my website, jeffsullivanphotography.com, is a good place. For a final piece of advice, I'd say don't underestimate your phone. It's so light and handy. Use it to find composition sometimes, and then grab your big camera and get your tripod there and put it where it needs to be. But sometimes the phone is, a good fast preview device to get you exactly that composition you're looking for.
Boom. Photography Talkers, I promise you this was going to be a really great interview. And again, Jeff really delivered. If you want to learn more about Jeff and also the show notes, check out the description at photographytalk.com/Jeff-Sullivan. Jeff, you've been very generous with your time. We thank you. My friend, we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Alex. Good talking to you.